delighted to be joined by the Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg, live from Somerset. Good morning to you, Jacob. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Now, Theresa Villiers, your colleague, has said this morning that she is deeply fearful that what we're heading for is almost a meaningless Brexit, that we are not taking advantage of the opportunity of leaving the EU to separate ourselves properly from the EU. Is she right?
She's certainly right to be concerned. That seems to be where the discussion is internally at the moment, that the talk on remaining in a customs union sets off alarm bells, and changing from an implementation to a transition period where we remain a vassal state of the European Union is also very concerning. And as your opinion poll showed, people don't want that.
The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, and indeed his senior colleagues have made it absolutely clear that it will be a transition, that we will effectively have all the obligations of being in the EU but no power. Is there anything, do you think, that you and your colleagues can do to prevent that?
Well, I think this is troubling on a number of counts. First of all, the Prime Minister said implementation, which meant we would have left and would then be implementing the consequences of having leaving. But currently, there's no clear destination, either in the government's mind or indeed agreed with the European Union, and there's no set time limit. One friend of mine said that it looked more like a plank than a bridge.
But if you look at the make-up of the parliamentary party, would you reckon that most Tory MPs agree with you on this issue?
I think there is huge support for what the Prime Minister said in Lancaster House in the Tory party manifesto, and marginally qualified by Florence. I think that commands support across the House from most people who voted leave and quite a lot of people who voted remain. As long as the Prime Minister and the government is consistent with its own stated policy, I don't think there are any difficulties. Changing it is hard.
One of the things that I was slightly surprised that you said is that, as I understand it, you said you actually thought it would be better to extend the Article 50 process and, in fact, remain a member of the EU than to have this transition. Is that your position?
Well, no, I was posing that as a question rather than saying that was my view.
Right.
My view is that we've got to leave on the 29th of March 2019, and I think there would be a huge political storm if the government tried to extend Article 50.
Right.
But if the government is saying we're de facto in the European Union, I wondered whether it might like to argue that we should be de jure in the European Union as well.
But just to be clear, you know, you are really urging Theresa May to get back to implementation and away from a situation where, you know, the European Court of Justice will still have jurisdiction over us. There'll be no controls over freedom of movement. In fact, we'll still be paying money in, of course. All of that you feel is just, as a matter of principle, wrong for the transition period.
Well, we're still in the European Union in those circumstances, and therefore the promise to the British electorate that we would leave on the 29th of March, the legislation that we would leave on the 29th of March, would become ineffective. I think this would therefore be a great mistake. We've got to deliver on Conservative policy, and that's where I fully support the Prime Minister in implementing what she has said in the first place. I haven't made these policies up myself. They are official government policy.
No, totally. But just to be clear, if she insists on pressing ahead with this vision of transition that is right now official cabinet policy, can she survive as leader and Prime Minister?
Well, I'm fully supporting the Prime Minister. I think the Tory party...
Why are you fully supporting the Prime Minister? I don't really understand, given that for you this is probably the most important issue on the table.
Because we need to have stability during the negotiations, because, as I was saying, in the Tory party's long and distinguished history, we have often got obsessed by internal machinations and who should lead us, and cause damage both to the party and to the country. I think it makes more sense to back the leader who has set out a clear position on Brexit and who is a lady of considerable principle and toughness, resoluteness. And I would be very surprised if, in the end, the Prime Minister didn't back her own policy.
So just to be clear, you would expect her to tear up the speech that David Davis gave on Friday?
Well, we haven't agreed the transition yet, and I don't think that transition makes any sense at all without complete clarity on the end point and the time limitation. Just saying in a waffly way this will be time limited is deeply unsatisfactory.
Now, if we get back to Theresa Villiers again, and she wrote in the Sunday Telegraph. Now, Sunday Telegraph is reporting that many of you think that the Prime Minister has been captured by her senior Whitehall officials, Jeremy Hayward and Ollie Robbins, who who it's thought don't really favour the kind of Brexit that you want.
I have no wish to criticise civil servants. I think civil servants do what the government tells them. Of course, they present policy options to the government, but ultimately, as Margaret Thatcher once said, advisers advise and ministers decide. I know it's polite to complain about advisers, but actually this is a job for ministers, and civil servants are appointed, are given roles to do, are given instructions, and it's the instructions that come from the top that matter.
Now, you wouldn't agree with the Chancellor that leaving the EU is, in a sense, a modest affair. What did you think when you heard him say that?
I tend to disagree with the Chancellor on many things, but on this issue he seems to be disagreeing with government policy, the Conservative Party manifesto and Mrs May's speeches. This is a real trouble for the government. The history of Chancellors being in opposition to Prime Ministers is not a good one or an encouraging one.
Can I just be clear, do you think he should remain in his job?
Well, I'm deeply respectful of the system that we have of government, and that is a matter for the Prime Minister. It wouldn't be right for me to trespass on it.
Come on, you're an independently minded, powerful intellect. You must have a view.
Of course I've got a view, yes, but I think that it's not for me to give that view publicly. I think this really is a matter for the Prime Minister, and the constitutional position is that the Prime Minister selects Her Majesty's government, and it would be wrong, I think, for me as a junior backbench MP to fire off as to which ministers I thought highly of and which ones I didn't.
But, and just to be clear, we are out of time. It's OK to make the case for a different form of Brexit, which many people would say, actually, in the current febrile circumstances, is about as toxic a form of disloyalty as you can have. But it's not OK to say, actually, the Chancellor is not doing his proper job. Most people would think that it's a slightly odd distinction.
Well, I think that would be eccentric of them. Not something you've ever been accused of, nor have I, of course. But I would simply say that what I am doing is supporting the government's own stated policy. Policy in Lancaster House, policy reiterated in the manifesto, that is the mainstay of what the government is trying to do. So I'm being as loyal as could possibly be on the policy question, and I'm biting my tongue on the personality question.
So there you are, Jacob. I take it back. You're not loyal in name only, or the arch Tory loyalist. Look, my thanks to Jacob.
We will make America great again.